It's going to be a Wednesday sometime in January. We do visit the library tomorrow. We do have your first speech coming up a week from yesterday. I will be telling you what your speech is about next Tuesday, the day you give the speech, because I don't want you freaking out ahead of time. It's going to be an improv speech where it basically just focuses on you being up and talking in front of class, and we go off of volunteers and knowing how much some kids in this class like to talk. Mostly you shouldn't have much of a worry that first day because we have kids who are going to want to talk, and I'll give you guys examples and stuff like that. I believe science has shown that we have a number of D1 yappers in this class, so you should be volunteers, but yes, so you should be safe as far as that goes. And then, yeah, I was curious about the inquiry project after hearing kids talk this morning and things like that, so we'll try to help you out. Take a look at your notes information that you have, and then we're going to have you turn it face down. We're going to do an oral quiz here in a moment, and then tomorrow we're going to do another oral quiz to see how well you've been paying attention. Today's oral quiz is easy. It's like all of 7 questions about what we covered yesterday. So now, flip your notes face down so you're looking at the stories, and let's see how much information is in your noggin so we can try to help you out from there. Let's go with the first one, Supercorn. When we started talking about fables, how many different types of fables did I introduce to you? Nicely done. Of our 3 types of fables, Abby, one of them has been around for thousands of years. What is the type that has been around for thousands of years as the original one? That's a good point. It is written on that paper right in front of you and starts with a T. You are correct. It does rhyme with traditional. I'm proud of you.
Traditional.
Nicely done, Abby. It's like it just came to you. And so traditionals are a type of fable that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Ryantine, then we got fancy and came up with a new type that allowed me to drop my first rap album yesterday. And what was our new type of fable that we came out with that starts with a V?
Verse.
Is verse. Nicely done. And that is where verse fable came in on that one. Emery, how is a verse fable written that makes it different than the traditional fable? It's written as a...
No, don't tell me. I know it.
I wasn't going to tell you. I might have said something like it starts with a P or rhymes with oem.
Stop!
But I wasn't going to tell you what the answer was. That'd be ridiculous. Because there's so many words that start with a P and rhyme with oem. I mean...
Oh, written as a poem.
It was written as a poem. Nicely done. Way to channel your inner Abby. And then we got to the newest one, Nyla. And this is the most recent one that has come up where we get to use all kinds of telephones and cars and stuff like that. And the newest one is called?
Modern.
Nicely done. That's where it comes up with the modern things that comes into it. And Ian, this Ian, not the candles Ian, I introduced you to a scientific term when we were talking about modern. You remember what that scientific term is?
Oh my god, Gavin's one.
Wait,
I just realized.
It was a very scientific term.
Wait, is it like thing on the side? Or is it something?
Yes, it's like a thing on the side.
Stuff.
Today-y stuff. Nicely done, Ian. And so that's where it uses the today-y stuff. Did we get to the next thing down? Or was like
Moral.
things? We did. Good job, Gia. That's where we talked about moral. Oh, Chloe, what is a moral?
Okay.
I didn't know.
Oh, oh gosh.
It is that thing. If only we could learn like a lesson from this in some kind of thing. If I could give you advice to help you
you learned a
out.
lesson.
Nicely done, Chloe. This is going to be the lesson that we learn, advice, something along those lines. Now you can turn those notes things back over and we get to help you out there. I don't know if we got to we did get to moral and the definition thing. So we had not talked about the history of fables. I think that's where we left off with you guys.
Probably.
Who knows? Let's find out. So then, with our history of fables, thousands of years ago, we didn't have school. Did we get that far?
No. That's pretty.
We got to talk about the fact that kids were just dumb and
We didn't even finish writing morals.
Oh, all right, one tells it. So moral is the thing that we have to learn. Here's why fables have to have morals to teach us. Thousands of years ago, we didn't have school. We allowed kids just to grow up to be stupid. The problem with kids who are stupid is they don't grow up. They tend to jump off of cliffs and run into traffic and stuff like that. So the old people in town said, hey, we have to stop having these kids die off. Why don't we try teaching them? But here's a problem. When the old people in town tried to talk to the kids to teach them, what would the kids do?
You're old. And you're dumb and
Exactly.
you don't know it.
They would ignore them and go, shut up, old person. We're not going to pay attention to you. We've got traffic to go play in. So the old people realized we have to trick these kids into learning. So the old people came up with a plan to trick kids into learning. So one day, there is an old person who was watching these kids running around playing in town, ignoring one of them who kept waving her hand around. And they see these kids picking up a giant rock, because there is a brand new game that got exciting that all the kids were playing called Roxy Headsy. And the way you play Roxy Headsy is you get a big rock, you go over to your friend, and you go whack, and you hit them in the head. If they die, they lose. If they don't die, then they get to have their turn to hit you. And the problem was, this was killing off kids left and right. So the old people go, all right, we're going to have to stop this. So one old person had the bright idea. He goes, all right, let me take care of this issue. So he goes and he finds this group of kids getting ready to play Roxy Headsy. He goes, hey, what are you guys doing? They're like, old man, we're going to play a game called Roxy Headsy. He goes, before you play that game, can I tell you a story? And the kids go, no, you're a creepy old man. He goes, well, what if I told you my story had an elephant in it? And the kids go, I'm intrigued. He goes, and a chipmunk. And it's about the game Roxy Headsy. And the kids sit down and go, okay, tell us this story, old person. And he goes, all right, here's my story. He goes, one day there was an elephant who was best friends with a chipmunk. And this elephant had heard of a new game called Roxy Headsy. And the kids are like, we know that game. He goes, I know. And he goes to his friend Chipmunk. And he goes, Chipmunk, would you like to play Roxy Headsy? And the chipmunk goes, how do you play? He goes, well, you pick up the biggest rock you can, you go over to your friend, and you thump them in the head with it. And then if they live, then they get to have their turn, they get to hit you in the head with it. Do you want to play? And the chipmunk thinks about it, and he goes, I'll play if I can go first. The elephant goes, all right, little friend, sounds like a good deal. So the chipmunk goes and picks up the biggest pebble he can. And he goes, all right, and he scampers up the elephant's nose. Scamper, scamper, scamper. Gets to the elephant's forehead, picks up his pebble and goes, are you ready? The elephant goes, yes. So the chipmunk takes his pebble and goes, tonk, right on the elephant's forehead. And the elephant goes, ooh, good round, my turn. And the chipmunk runs down his nose and goes onto the ground in front of him. And the elephant picks up his rock, and he goes over to the chipmunk. He goes, are you ready? And the chipmunk goes, yes. And the elephant goes, whack, and then picks up the rock, and the chipmunk is gone. And he's like, oh, it's a magic trick. And then he turns over the rock, and there's the chipmunk, flat like a pancake. And he killed his best friend, and they never got to play together again. The moral of the story is, don't kill your friends. And the kids are like, oh my God, that's the creepiest story ever, and you killed a chipmunk. But we're not going to play Roxy Headsy anymore because we don't want to become a chipmunk. And it worked. So the old people realized the only way we could get these kids to learn was to trick them by telling stories. And that was how Fables began. Most of that story is partly true. Emery?
Okay, so when you said the kids are running in traffic, who was driving the cars because you said people...
I apologize for calling on you. So with that one, we now have all of these old people who go around telling kids stories so that way they can learn and no longer raise their hand and ask about playing in traffic. And that's what slowly makes kids smarter and smarter, and eventually this telling of fables becomes school, which is what you have today. So now that we have fables to educate kids not to hit each other in the head, there are 5 things that make a fable a fable. So you can tell that, because I have kids ask, like, is Little Red Riding Hood a fable?
No.
Good question. Is Cinderella a fable? Good question. I'm going to give you the 5 things that make up to a fable, and then you can figure it out. The first thing, why do fables exist? Why do we have them?
Morals.
There you go. They have to teach something. If the story does not teach something, it is not a fable. It has to educate you in some way at the end. Like one of my favorite fables is about this classroom of cows that have notes in front of them, and none of them are writing the notes down because they're all in their happy place staring at... Oh, wait, no, that's real life. So you have to have a moral, so it helps teach kids a lesson of some kind. Next up, kids don't want to hear stories about creepy old people. Instead, there's only one type of character they want to pay attention to. And that is going to be animals. Because they're fluffy and delicious. So animals are going to be your main characters because those are what kids want to pay attention to. Not always. Do you guys know the fable, The Boy Who Cried Wolf?
Yes.
That's a fable, but the main character's not an animal. So every once in a while you're going to have one that pops up that's not an animal, but the vast majority of them should be animals of some kind or another. Also, don't forget, even if you are working on your inquiry project, you're still writing down these notes because tomorrow when you're in class, I get to ask you questions about it, and it would probably make you sad if you didn't have these written down in front of you. Because now you can do two things at once. What? Okay. Number 3. How long of an attention span do kids have?
Short.
Most
Short
of
and
you-
quick and skipping gets the point.
There you go. Because already if I were to say, hey, I'm going to teach you a lesson about Roxy Hedsey, do you have 4 hours for this? You're like, nope, I've already stopped paying attention. So if we want kids to pay attention to the end of our story, it has to be a really, really short story. So it should be brief and short. If you can't tell your story in a couple of minutes, then you are out of luck. Because kids are going to stop paying attention to you and start hitting each other in the head with rocks. The next important one is, if we want kids to learn, kids will learn best if they are entertained or if they laugh or giggle in some way. Kids don't learn well when they are bored or if they are depressed. So, most fables to get kids to learn,
Funny, happy. Oh, wait, what's that word? Oh.
humorous, they should be humorous or funny. They don't have to be like stand-up joke funny or like knock-knock funny. You're more looking at the fact that they shouldn't be depressing. Things to avoid.
He died.
Don't start up. You can have death, like the chipmunk dying, hilarious death. Just don't have depressing things. Like, one day there was a raccoon, and the raccoon went to visit his doctor. And the doctor said, I have bad news. And the raccoon said, what is it, Mr. Doctor? And the doctor said, you have stage 4 fur cancer. And we're going to have to shave off all of your fur because of this cancer. That would be much more depressing. And that's what you're going to try to avoid. So try not to have depressing raccoon fur cancer in your stories. The final one, number 5. At what age do humans stop being dumb?
25. Never.
18.
18.
You are, really? You're saying at 18?
18-year-olds are the most.
So you're saying everyone above 18 is smart and never...
25, 21.
Everyone above 21 is smart and never makes poor choices.
Yeah.
Mr. Brovicast.
So you're telling me all of your parents are smart and make good choices.
My mom is
They didn't make a
actually
good choice.
smart. Nobody.
No.
Yes.
So, exactly. As we've learned from YouTube and this thing called Facebook, old people can be idiots also. So because of fables, you're never too old to be dumb. So fables are aimed at people of all ages. When you're a kid, you need to learn not to hit your friends in the head with a rock. When you're an old hillbilly, you need to learn not to hit your friends in the head with a rock or to hold a firecracker in your fist or something like that.
I've done that.
And not tell other people about holding firecrackers in your fist.
What?
One day, there was a story
One
about
day
this
I
little...
went skydiving.
So now as you go through and ask me, like, does a story qualify as a fable? I'll say, does it have a moral? Are your main characters animals? So if you ask about like Little Red Riding Hood, way long, there's no moral at the end of it, so that's how you sort of qualify. With this, it turns out there was one person who is famous for making fables well known throughout the world. That's the person we're going to talk about.
Wait, no, let me guess.
Who's that guy?
No,
with,
stop,
like, the
no, let me
piggy
guess.
and the elephant?
His name starts with an A.
Albert
It's not on here.
Einstein.
Albert Einstein is not correct, but you sounded really confident. Kaysen is correct.
Who?
There's a guy by the name of Aesop. Sometimes he went by the name Albert Einstein. No. So I have 2 different Aesop books, and so he is the one that almost any time that there is a book about fables, it's about this guy named Aesop. So now, let's take a look at this guy named Aesop.
Are we supposed to write that down?
Oh my
Well, that'd be ridiculous. Why would you have a whole second column that says who? And you would write down
Like,
Albert
about
Einstein.
Albert
How do I spell that?
Did you just say I can't read a board in front of me? Please
That's
make fun
so
of me.
tiny, I can't read that.
You need some
Maybe
glasses.
I don't wear them.
You have glasses though?
Yes, I just don't wear them.
So Aesop, he died just a few years ago. I remember his death making big news when I was a kid. He lived roughly 620 to 560 BC. He lived in this place called Africa. We don't know where in Africa because at the time period they didn't keep good records of these things. But he was the kid in his village that paid attention when the old people told stories. And whenever they were telling stories, he just absorbed all of them. One day, when Aesop was a teenager, slightly older than you guys, this group of people showed up to the village where he was living, and they had spears and shields and armor, and they killed all the adults in his village. When they killed off all the adults, they then went around and told all of the kids there, you have two choices. We can kill you, or you can come back to our country as a slave. We are happy either way. Aesop thought about it, and he was like, well, slavery's not good, but death is worse, so I guess I'm going to do the slave thing. And he goes back as a slave to a country called Greece. And he becomes a Greek slave. Greek slavery was not like America's slavery. America's slavery was all, yay, racism. Greek slavery had nothing to do with racism. They did not care if you were white, black, male, female. Anybody was a slave there. What made you a slave in Greece is if you got your country conquered by Greece, after they killed people off, instead of killing off the kids, they would go, you now have an option. We can kill you also, or you can come back and be a slave. The good thing about being a slave in Greece, you weren't a slave for your whole life. You were only a slave until you proved that you could be a productive member of society. Then you were freed, given money and a house, and you became a Greek citizen. So it was only like a temporary thing until you assimilated, then things were good. So Aesop goes back to Greece, becomes a slave, works there until he gets into his 20s, still remembers all of these stories from when he was a kid. Then one day, things change. He's going to be out in this like farm area working, and he sees a group of these Greek kids going by, picking up a big rock and going over to each other and thunking each other in the head. And he's like, oh my God, what is wrong with these kids? And he goes over to these kids and goes, what are you doing? And they go, we're playing this new game called Roxy Headsies. He's like, oh my God, I remember that story from when I was a kid. He goes, kids, haven't you ever heard the story of the elephant and the chipmunk? And this was like 10 years before TikTok was invented, so kids had no form of entertainment. I know, TikTok's been around a long time. Aside from throwing dirt in the air and hitting each other in the head with rocks. So when this old guy says, let me tell you a story, the kids go, all right, what kind of story is it? And he goes, let me tell you a story about an elephant and a chipmunk. And he proceeds to tell these kids the story, and they are so fascinated at the end of it, they're like, that was a great story. We're never going to play Roxy Headsy again. But, do you have any other stories? He goes, sure, I have the one about the dolphin and the monkey. They go, ooh, tell us that story too. So he tells them that story. Well, the next day, they come back and they bring some friends with them. And they go, hey, do you have any more stories about animals? And he goes, yeah, I can tell you the one about the giraffe and the badger. And they go, ooh, and he tells them that story. And each day they keep coming back and bringing more and more friends with them. And then they start telling their parents, and their parents tell their friends, and eventually these rumors spread about these guys telling stories, and it works its way all the way up to the emperor, the guy that runs all of Greece, because the emperor was getting ready to play a game of Roxy Headsy with his friends, because he's like, I just saw it on TikTok, it just got invented, and he's like, I want to play a game of Roxy Headsies. And one of his friends, the emperor's friends, like, you can't play Roxy Headsies. Don't you know the story about the elephant and the chipmunk? He's like, what are you talking about? He was like, well, there's this guy in this field telling stories. So the emperor invites Aesop to come down and tell stories to him. And he finds these stories awesome. He's like, man, you're really good at storytelling. You're being wasted as a slave out there in the field. Why don't you come to the palace, live here, and tell stories for me, and I'll give you money for it. And Aesop's like, that's way better than working in a field. I'm all in. And he starts telling stories to any of the emperor's friends who come from other countries. He does this for years and becomes very famous. So famous he's eventually able to get the one thing that all slaves want, which is
Freedom.
actually it was a car. Kidding, it was freedom. He is eventually freed, and the emperor was like, "You deserve to be free. You can now go do whatever you want." And Aesop's like, "Ooh, what I want to do is tell stories, but now I'm going to get paid." And he makes fat bank going around telling all of these stories. He basically had concerts where he would go and have like all the people show up, and they would pay money, and he would tell stories to them. And at the end of it, some of these people would come up to him and go, "Hey, when you were telling your stories, I never heard you tell the story about the bee and the badger." He was like, I don't know the story about the bee and the badger." They're like, "Can I tell you the story?" And he goes, "Sure." So they would tell him the story of the bee and the badger. Once he heard that story, he would then reuse that story and tell it as his own at the next show. Problem is, those of you who take English Comp, there's a term for that. Plagiarism. So don't freak out. This next thing is going to tell you he's a plagiarist. It just says he's credited with writing all of these fables, but he mostly is retelling ones that he heard from Africa, India, and the Far East. In other words, he plagiarized. Like this book that's called Aesop's Fables, he didn't create these. He just became famous for retelling them to other people. And so he became the most famous plagiarist out there retelling these stories. Hi, Chloe. Oh, so on here, the way I do my notesy things is that I find it way more entertaining and fun for me that I don't tell you what goes in each blank. You just listen to story and then sort of plug things in where you think they should go. And so that's why things are written up there, and you just sort of have to process it. And that way it makes you think, which makes your head hurt and get all tingly. However you want to. You're the only one that has to see it. You can just say that, "Do not talk into your phone." I will smack that out of your hand. You just be a brave kid and you should figure out. You could say he stole the stories. And that would work also.
Yeah, but that's not a fancy. No, I don't got it.
I gotta be fancy.
Where's the Y? Plagiar.
There is no Y.
Play.
Unless you want to put a Y in yours.
It doesn't look right. I only go by looks.
Yeah, PLAYJERIZM.
Oh no, Abby, I didn't hear that.
Oh no! I was talking while he... And so he becomes famous for all of these stories that he himself did not create. And this goes great for a number of years. He becomes incredibly wealthy and famous throughout all of Greece. And things are going great. Until one day...
Wait, Hawk, I need to think for a second.
You keep thinking. One day,
I can't think what you
Greece gets into a fight with Gia. What's up?
Like, what would you say, like, where we are right now, like, in the notes?
I think we've gotten all the way down to the part where it says what happened to him.
Oh, shucks.
Or how
Wait,
he
what did he do? He plagiarized.
He plagiarized and got caught.
There you go.
He read other
He
people's
didn't
stories
get
like
caught.
they
He
were
didn't
his.
care.
Oh,
Because he was such a good
plagiarized.
storyteller, they were just happy with it. He did, I know.
He read other people's stories
Good job.
He plagiarized.
and was famous for it.
There you go.
I can't spell that. So.
It's over. PLAY
I told you there was a Y.
JERIZM.
JERIZM.
That's not how you...
That's plagiarism.
Yeah, that's what you said. Plagiarism.
Wait, actually... No, that's
I
not...
said plagiarism. Oh, IZED.
No, it's not. There's no Y in plagiarism.
What's important is that you spell it in a way that you read it and it
Wait,
makes
what if
sense
I
to you.
type it to my phone?
PLAGERIZED.
Wait, hold on. Does everyone have enough?
I
Can I
bet
use
you
your
want
Apple Watch?
Greece gets into this big war with a neighboring country. As this war goes along, there is a group of people, these fighters, who come from a town called Delphi. And these Delphi fighters, are the strongest, scariest, toughest fighters Greece has seen in years. They are so strong and tough, they help Greece win the war. At the end of it, the emperor is so impressed by these Delphinians, he decides he wants to reward them. So he talks to like the people in his little emperor group, and he's like, what can we do to really make an example of how impressive this group is? And they go, why don't you send a bag of gold to the city of Delphi so that everyone in that town gets 5 pieces of gold, and then we advertise it so everyone knows how incredibly special they are, and that makes them stand out. He's like, all right, not a bad idea. And someone goes, you know what? You should have Aesop deliver the bag of gold and then tell stories, and that makes it even more special. And Emperor's like, that's a great idea. So he calls Aesop in and goes, hey, buddy, would you mind doing me a solid? And Aesop's like, I got your back, buddy. He goes, can you deliver this bag of gold to Delphi so that everybody gets 5 pieces of gold and then stay there and tell stories afterwards? Aesop's like, great, I'm happy to help you out, not a problem at all. So they give Aesop this big bag of gold, he puts it into his little wagon and takes off and heads down to this place. Gets down to Delphi, and everyone is celebrating, like, yay, gold, yay, Aesop. And he's like, yeah, it's all good. He goes, here's what's going to happen. I have enough gold here to give every single person in this town 5 pieces of gold. What you're going to do is form a line, come up, I give you your 5 pieces, I make a little mark on your hand, and then once everyone has their gold, I will then come up and tell you guys stories. It'll be like a big party. And they're like, perfect. He goes, all right,
Oh, I thought we got
let's begin.
I thought we got food.
No, free gold, I know. And so everyone gets into a line to get ready, but before he can hand out the first piece of gold, a group of men separate from the line and walk up to him. And these are big, tough, scarred, scary-looking guys. And Aesop's like, what can I do for you?
What you doing?
They go, we have a problem with what you're doing. He goes, you have a problem with me giving gold to everybody in town. And they go, technically, yes. He goes, why? They go, well, sir, we are the men who had to go out and fight in that war. That's why we have all of these scars. He's like, we had to go out there and fight. We had to kill people. Some of our friends died. It was horrifying and scary. And Bobby over here only has 1 leg. And because of that, we think it's only fair that we did all the work. We should get 7 pieces of gold, and everyone else should get 3 pieces of gold. And they start going, do you understand? And he goes, all right, it makes sense as long as everyone else agrees. And he looks around the crowd, he's like, do you got... And before he can continue, a group of women separate from the group, and they come up, and they go, and not going to happen. He goes, what is your issue?
Because they weren't allowed to fight, so that's not fair.
And they go, so the same idea. They go, we had to stay behind. We had to take care of all of these kids and keep the houses from falling apart, and those are boys. Boys like stabbing each other. Even if there wasn't a war, they would just stab each other for fun because they think it's hilarious. And the boys were like, yeah, it is kind of fun stabbing each other. And they're like, because of that, we had to take care of these brats. Look at these kids. Like, oh my God, these kids are awful. Like, we deserve the 7 pieces of gold. Everyone else deserves the 3. And the men and women start yelling back and forth. And then a third group walks up. And I was like, what is your issue? And they go, well, sir, we're farmers. And during the war, we had to give up all of our crops so that they didn't die while fighting and their families didn't fall apart. So because of that, we lost money. We deserve 7 pieces of gold, and everyone else deserves 3. And all 3 groups start yelling at each other. Aesop finally goes, all right, listen. Can you agree you all did something different, but by working together, you guys did something amazing? And they go, we did. He goes, good. You all get 5 pieces of gold. They go, no! Who gets the most? You decide. He goes,
He gets.
okay, how about this? If I can come up with a solution that shows you that working together is the best way to do things, will you agree to it? And they go, all right, what do you got? He goes, okay. And he thinks about it for a moment. He goes, okay, I have an idea. Follow me. And he picks up the bag of gold, puts it into his little wagon. And he goes, come with me. And he leads them outside of town to this lake that is just outside of Delphi. And they all town follows him down to this lake. And he's like, and he gets out to the lake and he goes, all right, let me demonstrate something. Yeah. And he picks up the bag of gold and he waddles over this little rowboat. He's like, boom, and he drops the bag of gold into the rowboat and he starts paddling. And he paddles until he gets way out into the middle of the lake. And he stands up and he goes, all right, can you guys hear me? And they go, we can hear you. And he goes, good. He goes, now, you all did something amazing. Whether it was fighting in the war, taking care of kids, giving up your food, you each did something that made you guys better than every other city in all of Greece, which got you guys the 5 pieces of gold by working together. And they go, yay! But now you're fighting against each other because you all became greedy. And they go, yay! He goes like, no, that's not a yay thing. He goes, when you work together, amazing things happen. When you fight each other, you lose everything. Let me show you. And he picks up the bag of gold. He goes, do you see the bag of gold? They go, yay, gold. He goes, do you see the lake? They go, yay, no. And he goes, boop, and throws the gold into the lake. And he goes, spooky. Gold is gone. They start to yell. He goes, shush. Remember, you agreed. They go, okay. And he paddles back. Paddle, 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 paddle. And he goes over to the group of people and he goes, listen, when you guys worked together, it was amazing. And you guys did something that no one else could do. But when you fought each other, you lost everything. Do you see how working together is the best solution? And the town all looked at each other and they go, working together. So they did, to kill him. And Aesop was killed by a mob on the shore of a lake just outside Delphi when he chose to throw money into the lake as opposed to giving it to them. And that was how Aesop died. He died how every teacher wants to go out, being killed by their students. Well, they just accepted that. They're like, someday we get to kill a teacher. The emperor was not very excited by all of this, by the way. It kind of made him a little on the grumpy side. When it got back to him and he found out that the gold was gone and they killed Aesop, he sent in an army and killed off like half the Delphians as a punishment because he was wanting to brag about how awesome they were. Excuse me. Why is Aesop important? What did he do?
He told them.
Look at you having knowledge in your head. Tomorrow we get to talk about animal stereotypes.
Oh.
I know, it's going to be all kinds of interesting stuff. And we get to go to the library too.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What's up, Emery?
According to my calculations, when you said the women, I thought the people killed all the women, all the adults.
In Africa. We're now in Greece. Yeah, that's where the whole rest of the story came in.
I thought you were going to say something about the money, and then it's not really money.
Am I off on my time?
Yeah.
We get
out at
2:18. Oh, I apologize. That's the brainy bits. Never mind. We get to talk about stereotypes right now. So on this one, here's our issue. Aesop is dead. Wait, do you guys know what illiterate means?
Can't speak English. Can't speak the language of the country they're in. Can't speak the
Gibberish.
I like the irony of the kid loudly yelling can't speak, but you're on the right track. It's not can't speak.
Can't
Think.
listen to the language. Can't speak.
So-
No, I know what it is.
Can't what?
One.
Read or write. So when you're illiterate, it means you cannot read or write. So all of these stories that Aesop told, he told to people who were illiterate and could not read or write. Yet we still have books today that are supposedly from him.
It's fake.
So how do we have stories today if he told these stories to people who could not read or write?
Is this Anne Frank?
Gakers?
Because they were passed down to generations.
There you go. That's where we introduce this thing called oral tradition. Oral tradition is how we have these stories now. Oral meaning to say a thing out loud. Tradition meaning to pass it down. So all of these fables, we have them today because they were passed down from one person to the next. Even though he was dead, you would still have people who would see other kids playing Roxy Headsy, and they're like, hey, haven't you heard the story of the elephant and the chipmunk? They're like, what are you talking about? And so they would still pass down these stories to other people. But there's a problem with oral tradition. Something happens to our stories.
They get changed.
They get changed. So that's what happens with oral tradition, is these stories get changed over time. Some of them you're going to take out characters or add characters. One of the big things I've noticed, I looked up in my 2 different Aesop Fables books, I looked up the same fable. There's one about the ant and the grasshoppers, about an ant that work really hard and a grasshopper that goofs off. When I looked up both of them, there's a little kid version, which was really short, and there was a bigger kid version, which was much, much longer. This is an example of oral tradition. Same story, same thing happens, but one of them has a lot more into it, and one of them changed. Same thing with the motifs. Moral. In this one it says, plan for the days of necessity or use your time wisely. And this one it said there's a time for work and a time for play, or don't procrastinate. So it changes. That's what happens with oral tradition. It changes over time.
Is this like, does it go with like the modern fables? Because it like, you change it like, and you tell it the way like
It can
it
be.
is.
Like I said, connected to it. Absolutely. How long are fables supposed to be?
Short.
Short. With short stories, do you remember what we call the beginning boring stuff?
Exposition.
Exposition. Here's the problem with fables. Because they're so short, we don't have time for exposition, which is where you introduce characters and you get to find out who's good, who's bad, and backstory and stuff like that. Fables are so short, you have to know right away what kind of character it is. So that's where we're going to introduce a thing called a motif. This is their version of exposition, or their version of stereotyping, if you will. A motif is when you have a character that is the exact same in every story. As an example, fairy tales. Anytime in a fairy tale there's a stepmother, what kind of character will she be?
Evil.
Evil. That's a motif. Every stepmother is evil in fairy tales. So when it says a common character that's constant throughout stories, it doesn't mean like Harry Potter being in 7 novels. It means like every time you see a stepmother, you know she's evil in these stories. Same thing happens with fables, but with animals. They're animal stereotyping. So I'm going to give you guys some examples of animal stereotypes. If we have an owl in a fable, do you know what stereotype? What is it?
Wise.
There you go. This is why it's a stereotype, because it's not true. Owls are not smarter than any other animal. It's just because they like to ask questions all the time. Owls.
Duh.
See, that's owl humor. And so that's where you have owls always play the smart, wise one. So if I were to tell you a story about the owl and something, you know the owl is going to be the smart character in there. Now I know when class ends. Now we'll stop. Tomorrow we're going to go through the rest of our stereotyping. And when we do our oral quiz to begin tomorrow's class, I've got a whole bunch of questions I get to ask you.
Yay.
That's what I was thinking. We're on the same page. Bye, home children.